Welcome to the Whistles. I'm your host, Joe Chapman, Detroit Lions News Podcast. That's who we have the podcast for. We'll put the link in below. But if you're a Detroit Lions fan, this is going to be the channel for you. We're going to have daily updates on Detroit Lions, especially with the season coming around. And we're going to have videos highlighting certain areas of the team, and we will put those out there too pretty soon. It was an interesting time for the Detroit Lions. Obviously, when they came to camp and Dan Campbell spoke, he put out there that, they haven't earned anything yet, and that's good to hear. But it was also great to hear that Aiden Hutchinson, Jared Goff, and Tracy Walker echoed that statement saying they haven't earned anything yet. And a lot of times what happens in the NFL is teams often choke on their own arrogance. And you see it all the time in football. There's a lot of teams out there that they have a good year, the year prior, and they go to the regular season of the next season and they aren't the same team because their team chemistry bought in too much to the hype. And that's something that you really like to see from this Detroit Lions team because ultimately, a lot of people peg this team as be a playoff team, and they have to be a playoff team. That's the expectation for the Detroit Lions this year. Most people, myself included, the expectations are a division title, period. End of story. So that's what's got to happen with the Detroit Lions. They have to earn the expectations of what they're expected to do, which is win a division title, go to the playoffs, and hopefully win a playoff game. It's been a long time since they've won a playoff game in Detroit. It was back in the Pontiac Silverdome days. So I wasn't even born when they won a playoff game. So that tells you everything you need to know about the futility of this franchise. But it seems to be changing with Dan Campbell at the helm, and obviously the leadership is echoing the same mindset. There was a lot of injury news to come out, and we're going to get to that right now. Obviously, Cameron Sutton was starting at the cornerback position. His guy that he came in with, Emmanuel Moseley, he's going to be on the PUP list. And the way Dan Campbell described it was a little bit interesting. He said that it wasn't a setback; it's a more of dialing him back so they can get him back sooner. Seems to me like it's a setback. We'll see what happens. We're going to monitor that. Obviously, that's going to be a huge part of the issue. But the Detroit Lions, for once, have the cornerback depth. Jerry Jacobs was starting opposite of Cameron Sutton, so that's good. And, obviously, these hybrid safeties, which is Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Brian Branch, they will be starting in a slot. So, very interesting to hear that. One of the guys that was mentioned in a lot of what the beat writers was Starling Thomas, the UDFA cornerback who played pretty damn good at training camp day one, and it's going to be interesting to see what he does in the preseason because obviously we know that Brad Holmes has found a knack for finding UDFAs who could help the roster. Obviously, AJ Parker is one of them. Jerry Jacobs is one of them. UDFAs are huge. If you can get one UDFA, that's a massive pull by Brad Holmes. So Brad Holmes, this is looking like he found another gem in the UDFA pile. The interesting part was obviously Marvin Jones on the no football injury list. Obviously, that was kind of unexpected. And to put it in frank, is like a lot of people don't know what the the non football injury list is. The non football injury list is when you have an injury that you sustained from, let's say you were with the Jacksonville Jaguars, like Marvin Jones. A lot of times, the no football injury list means that you got that injury from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Or in the case of Hendon Hooker, who is also on the non football injury list, it was from Tennessee. It doesn't mean that you sustained it outside of football. It means that you sustained it probably from your last team. So that's usually what happens. We didn't know about the Marvin Jones injury. It's going to be interesting to see what that means. Does he come off the list pretty soon, like in the next week or so? That's something to monitor. We'll monitor that. There was no Denzel Mims at Detroit Lions practice today. That's a guy that I'm kind of interested to see how he's going to fit in the offense. And with Marvin Jones out for the meantime, does he kind of take a role away from Marvin Jones, maybe pushing Marvin Jones back? There's a lot of to like about Denzel Mims. I talked about it when they traded for him. He's a second round pick. He didn't have much quarterbacks to throw him the ball. And I feel like he is someone that could really help this team move forward in kind of like the DJ Chark role. So, a lot to like from the first day. There was people that were talking about, the expanded roles of the edge rushers. Charles Harris coming back, Romeo Okwara finally being back for a full year. This is going to be a fun time for the Detroit Lions, especially these edge rushers, because there's a lot of edge rushers on this team right now, and I know that the Detroit Lions are expecting a lot from their edge rushers. Josh Pascal, Charles Harris, Romeo Okwara, James Houston, Aiden Hutchinson, and Aiden Hutchinson talked, and he said, "Look, a lot of that stuff came easy for me last year, so we're gonna it's a good time for him because he gets another year to grow in training camp and another year to develop, and this is really good because with the depth that they have, you can keep them loose and you can keep them fresh, and that's what you want to hear from Aiden Hutchinson and the Detroit Lions. Hopefully, this is something that it will help the Detroit Lions go forward. One of the things I want to mention, it wasn't mentioned enough. I mean, I think a lot of people on the beat writers were talking about it, but there was a three-line interior defensive tackle kind of rotation. On the first rotation, it was Isaiah Buggs and Ali McNeil. Second rotation was Broderick Martin. It was Christian Covington. Christian Covington might be the most underrated player for the Detroit Lions from their offseason, because I think Christian Covington was a really good player last year. You watched some of his games; he was just fantastic. It was awesome to just watch him and the way that he played the run. That was the most interesting thing about Christian Covington. And to be honest, I think he's going to have a pretty nice year with the Detroit Lions. The one thing I was kind of looking back at, and I'm going back because I'm trying to figure out what they're doing. But obviously Christian Covington last year played with the Chargers, and the Chargers for a little bit were a team that couldn't stop the run, and then they turned it into a pretty damn good team, and Christian Covington was a big part of that. I was surprised to see Broderick Martin on the second line, to be honest, the second defensive tackle rotation. It obviously shows that he is farther along than most people think. And this is a guy that Brad Holmes drafted in the third round when there was better defensive tackles that people perceived on the board. And Broderick Martin is an interesting player because he's a big hoss and he is a huge dude. And if he could just become something like Snacks Harrison, where on a rundown you send him in and he's just going to stuff the run, that could be really good for Detroit, and that's going to be great. But the main thing we need to get to was Levi Onwuzurike isn't on the injury list. We talked about the injury list before. People might have thought, where is Levi Onwuzurike? He was playing on the third pair with I think it was Benito Jones. And that's very good because obviously, they put him on the third pair because they want to get him acclimated and they want to bring him back slowly. But what I like to see is Levi Onwuzurike practicing pretty good. And from all people that I was following via Twitter, he had a pretty good practice, and it's going to be interesting to see how he develops. Obviously, with the preseason, we're going to see a little bit about Levi Onwuzurike because this is a huge year for Levi Onwuzurike. Truly one of the biggest years of his career. The first 2 years were majored with injuries, and now he's back, and hopefully he stays healthy because he was a second round pick. If he and Ali McNeil can just be good, this team could be set up for a really good defensive tackles. And I think that's kind of what Brett Holmes was relying on, to be honest. And he's hoping that this pays off in a big way. It was interesting. This is from Pride of Detroit. I'm gonna read this for you. I lost it. Damn it. But the running back battle. The running back battle is one of the things I want to kind of hit on real quickly as I pull this article up because nothing ever goes the way that I think it's going to go. So anyways, the Detroit Lions their training camp is starting off, and it's starting off in a big way. Obviously, we know about the running backs at the top, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. But what Pride of Detroit had was interesting from the fact that a lot of people they said the running back rotation also played out as expected. Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs splitting starter reps, with Craig Reynolds taking RB3 reps. Justin Jackson stood out the most on special teams, where he was the top option as Jack Fox's personal protector during punt drills. I think a lot of people kind of gloss over how good Justin Jackson is on special teams, but that's someone that you have to monitor. And here's where I want to get to though. The open battle for starting right guard. While the Lions took things slow with their few of the offensive linemen who are recovering from injury in the spring, Vaitai, but on Sunday it was Graham Glasgow who opened as the first team right guard, and Vaitai took his snaps with the second team. It's going to be interesting because on this thing, they said another minor change on the second team saw Matt Nelson repping at left tackle and allowing Efedai to stick at right tackle. Ross Piersbacher at center, and there's some other guys in there. So it's a very interesting time. Obviously, the Detroit Lions right guard position is going to be a part of the line that we are going to monitor because there was a constant rotation of guys last year, and that was a little bit what we kind of expected because of Vaitai's injury. And hopefully they find the right connection for next to Sewell and right now where they can kind of cohesive that line, because last year you had guys like Coyote Oshika, you had guys like Evan Brown. There was a rotation of players pretty much weekly, and that it's good to have some depth there. So if Vaitai is the second guard, that would open up a really good depth option for the Detroit Lions. So this is day one of training camp. There's a lot more to go. We're going to have more videos on the Detroit Lions, but here's the observations we are going to give you. And we're going to give you observations every day. We're going to kind of narrow down some observations that we figure out from Detroit Lions camp, and we are going to give them to you on Between the Whistles Detroit. So please subscribe. And if you're new to the channel, I promise you I won't stumble over my words like I did with the Piersbacher and all that stuff, because it's just something that happens, especially when you're reading and you couldn't pull up the article at first. But this is Between the Whistles Detroit Lions news podcast, and we will see you in the next video as we talk more Detroit Lions football coming up to training camp.